Hello. Hang on. I need volume. Can you hear me? I can't hear you at all. I don't know why. Hold on. Um, let me. Is your mic on? Is your audio on? I have no sound. Um. Okay. Okay. So it wasn't me. You guys can't hear either. So maybe we'll get her to rejoin here. We'll try that.
All right, we're trying again.
Yeah, you're good. Can you guys? I think everyone can hear me. They couldn't hear you. They actually commented. So something going on, but that's fine. No biggie. Okay. All right. Everything sounds clear now.
Ooh.
All righty. Okie dokie. We are getting some people joining slowly but surely. So we can go ahead and get right into it. So thank you, everybody, for joining in for another lovely live. We're going to talk about something unfunctional health related today. Yay. So we're going to talk about muscle growth. I put up a question box too, but mine came up kind of late, so I don't even know how many questions I have. I know you had put one up. So let's start with your questions first, and then I'll check and see what I have, but we'll take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question I got is a surplus really necessary for muscle growth? And I would argue if you are wanting to put on quality tissue, yes. Like obviously we can talk about like newbie gains and newbie growth by, just looking at a muscle or just looking at a dumbbell and they'll put on muscle pretty easily. But when it comes to wanting to actually sculpt a physique, especially when we're talking about that physique enhancement realm and bodybuilding, like you are going to want to be in a caloric surplus. But that doesn't mean that you need to like dirty bulk and eat like a jackass just to put on size. Like, a modest deficit where you're gaining like, 0.25% to 0.5% of your body weight on a consistent basis. That's a good starting point for me.
Yeah, agreed. So the idea of recomping or staying close to maintenance is not only an impractical, it's just a very impractical and slow way to go about the process, a process that's already pretty slow to begin with, which is muscle growth. So it's funny because I had pulled up my questions actually, and someone asked me if you could lose fat basically while in a surplus, and that kind of goes along with this. And really, the only time that we see those things are in untrained or detrained individuals, so like new people, and advanced people can do it if they're detrained, meaning they dicked around in the off season and then they start training hard again and maybe add enhancements and things like that. You will see cosmetic changes, but I think that some people mistake cosmetic changes with muscle growth. So for example, like if you're detrained and now you start training, you're going to start partitioning nutrients into muscle tissue that otherwise really wasn't being used. So you're fuller, you have a more voluminous look. But yeah, I wouldn't waste time doing that personally.
No, like why half-ass something? Like if you want to put on muscle, you need to take the steps that it needs to take to put on muscle. Like
So
why waste time?
100%.
Another that I got was how do you know that you're training hard enough to put on muscle tissue? And I think that's actually a great question because
Yep.
in this space, it's like we're kind of pounded to death with this idea of like training till failure. And, obviously there's so many different nuances and ways to train. But I think the biggest thing that helped me was videoing my sets and then also sending them to my coach. So you get an outside perspective of whether or not you were taking, sets to the place that you need to take for muscle growth. But I think if you're not working with a coach, even just videoing yourself and looking at your overall performance and overall form and engagement and making sure that you're moving load with a purpose and you're not like half-assing things, you're looking at your tempo. Like ideally, as you get to failure, your reps will start to slow down because it is taking every muscle fiber and you're recruiting more motor units and more muscle fibers to the point where like things are slowing down because your body is like fighting for its freaking life. And I think that's a good starting point to assess whether or not you're training hard, is like actually taking an honest bird's eye view of your training performance via the video and be like, hey, did I have more to give during the set? Or, you know what, no, I gave what I could for the set and we're, you know, changes in the logbook, or you're seeing changes in your physique when you're taking photos.
Yeah, and so I did a good live with Dr. Scott Stevenson on this. We talked about this idea of like reps in reserve and how there was like research that was kind of showing us like, okay, maybe we don't need to train to failure to elicit muscle growth. And I think that got misconstrued and people didn't train hard enough, right? So the goal really is to create adaptation. So we know that you need a certain threshold in proximity to failure to create adaptation, right? And the more advanced you get, the more basically the more effort, maybe more volume, depending on the person that you need to create adaptation. So I think that in a new person, for sure, I mean, if you do anything, it's going to be better than nothing, and it's going to probably elicit a response. But as you get more advanced, I mean, you're going to have to basically, this is your total workload. We'll pretend this is your total workload. You're not going to get results over here anymore. Like, you need to be here, right? So volume, intensity, like all these parameters. So for sure, like you said, I love that, being honest with yourself and your assessment. Something that we had talked about on that live too was like this idea of failure, like mechanical failure versus technical failure and stuff. Like, I think that you should, like you said, reps are going to slow down as the set goes on, but also I think that reps should look the same in terms of execution, right? Like, yeah, they're going to get slower as you fatigue and as you fail, but they shouldn't necessarily, you shouldn't be making like all these compensations in your form to continue to rep for days, because like you and I, we kind of talked about that too. Like when you are advanced and you're mentally strong, especially on the higher rep work, you can pause and go and fucking, we can make this a 5-minute ordeal. Mm-hmm. You know, we can just keep making micro adjustments in our form and in our tempo to just keep hitting reps until you just, fall over. Right. So yeah, great. That was a great question.
Yeah. Or like me, and do rest pauses by just taking big old deep breaths when you're like, no, just hit it, fail. And
yeah. I mean, we keep going. And it's especially when you're talking about movements where you're really braced, like it's a little more difficult to do that on a barbell squat, but like on a hack squat, or maybe even a more extreme example, like a leg extension where you're really locked in. I mean, shit, you could keep going forever with enough adjustment in your execution, for sure.
Exactly.
Definitely. Good question.
The last question that I got is when to add intensifier techniques. And for me, I would make an argument that you would want to utilize them for their benefit in a surplus growth phase when you can handle those extra intensifiers, but not everything needs to be a drop set. Not everything needs to be a rest pause set. Like, the whole point of intensifiers is to prolong a set, to get that mechanical tension, to get that, progressive overload without having another straight set. So when you're coming out fresh from, a dieting phase, contest prep, now's not the time to start adding in drop sets, rest pause sets, stuff like that. Like, now is the time to allow your body to just recover from all of the dieting adaptations that happened, whether it was like, a lifestyle cut or a contest prep. But for me, I like to utilize intensifiers, specifically when, in a caloric surplus, in a growth phase, especially when PEDs are in place. But then also, like, if we do have general set programming and we are wanting to be respective of the time spent in the gym, where traditional, like 3-4 sets is just not only brutal mentally and physically, but also like who the fuck has time for that? So it's like if we need to do some set extenders, a drop set here or there, maybe some giant sets or super sets to save time and to make it a little bit enjoyable too, because you do have that excess burn that does some people do like. I think those are really important things to consider when designing a program.
Yeah, I like that last piece especially. I mean, from a practicality standpoint, and I guess it depends on how you define intensifiers, but if you would define something like cluster sets, types of cluster sets, rest pauses, or muscle rounds, things like that, where you're grouping basically mini sets together and reaching multiple failure points, or I should say you're accumulating more volume in like a shorter amount of time. From a practicality standpoint, they help a lot, right? Maybe also from like a risk prevention standpoint, where you can, especially if you're like in a movement that you're kind of braced and locked in. But also, to kind of add to that too, I mean, I think that if you are able to generate a lot of intensity in all of the movements that you do, especially more advanced people, is you really got to be careful adding a lot of intensifiers, because like someone like me, I can train pretty intensely on a straight set, and yeah, I can do a drop set, right? Like I can take some weight off, but the amount that I'm going to need to drop to be able to even perform 1 or 2 good reps is going to be like, I'm going to have to cut by more than 50% on some movements, to be able to do anything. So the question really becomes from a CNS standpoint, from a nervous system and a recovery standpoint, does it make sense to do that, right? Because, I mean, you can definitely get yourself into trouble. It kind of goes back to what we said in the last question and extending the sets. You can do a quadruple drop set and just keep going, but like, what is the quality and actual ROI on that at that point, right? Maybe not a lot,
Exactly. Like I just posted a reel of my leg press where we have 3 sets within 2 to 3 RIR, but my final set's a drop set. If you watch that video, you saw me fucking cry. It's painful. It hurts. Like, you don't always want to like. My favorite phrase is from Lee Haney, where it's simulate, don't annihilate, and it's like just shit and get off the pot. Like do what you need to do, but don't like prolong your suffering for the sake of, I don't know, IG engagement, like because you want to feel like a martyr. Like train with a purpose.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't even really know how to take a straight set to mechanical failure. So like something that I see this a lot. Drop set's a great example. So they do the drop set and it looks, they're like, wow, that's really intense, but each actual portion were so far away from failure that I'm like, well, we could have probably accomplished a lot more by just doing one straight set, So I would argue that maybe people leave too much in the tank and in anticipation for the next set, right? And so that's not a good habit to get into either. And a lot of people will do that when you're adding intensifiers like drop sets and cluster sets and things. So that's something to look out for.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I have some questions. Let me see if I can pull these up here.
What's going on, big brother Jace?
What's up, Jace? All right. Give me 1 second. I might pause the video, but give me just a second here.
Fine. While you're doing that, I'll talk about Jace, your thing that you just reposted about like, someone saying that like they touched a new weight, but yet their form went to shit, their tempo was shit. That was money. That was money. Goes really good with our topic today.
Perfect. Okay. Let me grab these here. I just send them to myself because it won't let me look at my IG. I should have been better prepared. Okay. Oh, here's an interesting question. That's not okay. A little bit different. Tips on staying more present during training sessions to maintain intensity.
Do
I
not
like. Oh,
do
what's
not
that?
disturb on your phone. Like put on do not disturb. Like delete Instagram, Facebook. Don't even bring your phone in the fucking gym. Like
I like that. So, do you want to do this one first? I have some like a couple of different ways to look at it, but um, I'll tell you this. Kind of depends on like why you're getting distracted. Um, yes, are me and Ash? Yeah, I mean that's the intention, Jace. Yes, definitely. Both of you at the same time. I think I'll squeeze you both into super heavies. I think
perfect.
that'll be the goal. We compete against each other.
Yo, one time 50. You well no, we can get me back there again.
Yeah, I think we can get. I think I can probably get you over that weight cap. Be about 225 on stage.
Perfect.
Um, that's funny. So, tips for staying present during training. So, okay, so a couple things. Is like personally, I'm someone that if the training, depending on the programming, as like certain phases of the training are very, very intense, I almost I almost don't like to think about what what I need to do on my next set until it's time to do it. And the reason for that is like I don't want to psych myself out on certain things. Um, so I will. It's not like I need to sit there and browse on my phone, but maybe if I have someone else training with me, maybe I'll like go outside and watch the fucking birds jump around outside or do something completely unrelated to what I'm doing other than sitting there and kind of stewing on it because, all of this is sympathetic response. Like if you've ever trained really intensely, you can definitely basically, blow all of that mental energy before the set even starts. You don't really want to go into a set. You want to go into a set hyped up and ready, but you also don't want to go into a set where you are, overzealous. Like what I see a lot is people get overhyped is like the first few reps on the set, they're way too fast, their form is off, they're not executing properly, and that's because they're almost like overhyped for that set. So for some people, just not over focusing on what they need to do until it's time to execute that movement is maybe a good thing. But for other people, they're just completely out somewhere else, and they're like you said, they're too worried about maybe what everyone else in the gym's doing or what. I haven't trained in a public gym in a long time, other than every once in a while. So it's a little bit different, but maybe that's a little different take on that for some people.
Yeah, as someone that does train in a popular bodybuilding gym where there's a lot of tripods and stuff like that, it can be very, very distracting to see people on their phones, get the perfect angle. They spent, hundreds of dollars on this nice piece of camera equipment and they're doing like 5 cent reps. So for me, like what I think is really important is to put my phone on do not disturb and to time my sets so that way like I'm much more focused. So when that timer goes off, I think to myself, okay, time to go to work. My music is like very Derek Lutz, like death metal, hardcore, like screaming in your ear type of thing. But for all of my top sets where I do tend to kind of, nitpick or like over hyper focus to the point where like I'm second guessing what I'm able to do. On Spotify, there's a minute and a half of just Ronnie Coleman screaming, and I will put that on my Spotify playlist. And like I said, it's Ronnie Coleman screaming, "Yeah, buddy, lightweight, nothing but a peanut." And sounds dumb, but mentally, I think to myself, like I'm training with Ronnie Coleman right now, and that helps me to find a little bit of the joy that I have in training. And to remind myself to just have fun doing it, right? Like train like it's my last fucking time in the gym. And that mentality has really helped me to, yes, beat myself up with a purpose in the gym, but also have fun with it as well. Because I think sometimes as competitors, you just view your training as something that you have to get done, and you kind of lose that love and lose that joy. And for me, that's not how I want to bodybuild. I want to do it because I fucking love doing it. I need to remember that love and joy, especially in the gym, especially right before hard top sets.
Yeah, I so I obviously enjoy the same kind of genres of music, but I'll tell you this is over the years, my method is basically that as I'll like ramp the intensity of my environment up through either music or whatever that might be as I approach a top set or as I approach those working sets. But I'm basically listening to like classic rock and light shit the rest of the time because um, again, like I don't want to waste, I don't want that sympathetic nervous system response the entire time, like while I'm warming up, while I'm doing these acclimating through these workup sets and stuff. I don't want to waste all that energy. So a lot of time, you know, I'll ramp it up. I've even gotten to a point like on some of my leg training where I'm just not until I'm ready to go and like lock into that set. It's whimsical. I'm not thinking about anything else. And then all of a sudden, click it on. Let's go. We're going to do it right now. Um, Now, some people obviously need a little bit more build up than that. But for me personally, that's what works for me. And that allows me to not waste too much, excess energy as I work up to that. Because I've had a tendency in the past to definitely like, get overly hyped. And like I said, I think that execution is what I see suffer the most, especially when you have a rep number in mind. A lot of time what I'll see is on sets that are, especially as you get into a higher rep range, that double-digit rep range, people tend to skew the tempo at the beginning of their sets. The first 8 reps are going to be exponentially faster than everything else because you're just kind of like rushing through it to minimize the amount of fatigue that you're creating, and you're not really connecting with the rep.
Right.
You're not feeling the rep. So something that people can do is really try to figure out just the right amount of hype for them personally throughout that session. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. That also might mean playing around with tempos. For me, I have a hamstring injury that healed, but neurologically my left is much different than my right. And so to really connect with the left side, on my line leg curls or seated leg curls, I will have a 2-second isometric hold at the bottom to really try to connect with that left side. And it's helped immensely. And, I'm really thankful that I was able to kind of figure that out for myself because yes, the sets take a little bit longer, but at the same time, the reps are quality. And I've noticed such a big difference in just the growth that I've had as well from just, a 2-second pause at the bottom to really connect and, add that, tension at the bottom.
Yeah, for sure. And there's that kind of will segue us into a little bit different topic. We can talk about rep execution. I think is a really good thing to talk about since we've kind of already brushed over that. So like I had mentioned previously, maintaining consistent tempos is important. Counting numbers in your head may be not the way to do that. I don't want someone to be like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's probably not the play. However, maybe it is just videoing yourself and holding yourself accountable. Maybe it is intentionally going a little slower at the beginning and maintaining that tension. What you'll notice in an advanced trainee versus a novice trainee is an advanced trainee generally has a neural connection as soon as the set starts, whereas a novice trainee, I don't feel it till I'm 3/4 of the way done with the set, right? Well, that is where that rep execution really becomes important, and that neural connection becomes super important. And that's where actually, having a certain tempos in mind can be useful. So you're not rushing certain parts of the set versus other parts of the set. But for me, my goal in rep execution, because we were talking about rep execution, is literally to make sure that if I rewatch that when I look at, let's say I'm doing and granted, yes, things can move around a little bit, don't get me wrong, but if I'm looking at reps, I want the path, I want the bar path, I want the machine path, I want the path of my arm path, elbow path, all these things to look pretty darn similar on every rep that I execute, even if the speed of the rep slows down at the end. I don't want to sit there and like all of a sudden tuck my elbows in to bring more tricep into the movement as my pecs fatigue or something, right? So making sure that everything looks uniformed, as as uniformed as possible throughout that set it's difficult. And there's something that Scott and I talked about is like, is rep execution a skill or is it a mindset? Because I think that most people fail at rep execution at the end of their sets because it's really hard, because everything in your body's like, let's break form to make this easier, right? Like, why don't we just move our arms or legs or stick our butt out a little bit or do something that will make this rep a little bit more comfortable for us to do?
Right.
But then you're losing tension on the target muscle. You're potentially setting yourself up for injury, things like that. So I think that a real skill is actually being able to mentally make yourself stay in position throughout that entire set. That's really tough to do.
Absolutely. And I think that starts with, yes, going into the set with the right mindset, but to not be rushed and to take your time with the setup. Like, for example, like something like a dumbbell RDL. It's like the dumbbells, especially when you get, super heavy, it can be really easy to lose your balance, but really like corkscrewing your, I use the term corkscrew or root your, feet into the ground and get set up before you initiating the reps. Because how many times do we see people adjusting mid-set? And it's like, if you don't have it from the get-go, it's a wasted set. So take your time getting set up. Make sure that you have like the foot placement right, the stoppers right, the bench height right. Like, I write all of that shit in my logbook, so I remember, okay, leg press, it's seat number 5. This is where the stoppers are. So that way, the next time I go into that leg press, my shit's already settled. I know where to place my feet. I get mentally locked in, and then, we go to work, get shit done. But I think that's really, really overlooked in some of the industry, is like writing little notes to yourself in your logbook or however you keep tabs on yourself. So that way, the next time, a week later, or however frequently you train with that exercise, your exact setup within a few errors of, margin, of course, but it's the same. So that way you can execute as closely as possible.
Yeah, especially any like free weight movements for, dumbbells, barbells, anything like that, because there's a lot more room for error in terms of setup.
Yeah.
Right. You can definitely alter, and everyone's guilty of this. You can definitely alter the way that you set up a movement, even unconsciously. Something that I've seen is like, if you look at someone with, let's say that you have a training block and they're training the same movement in the training block for 8 weeks or 12 weeks. If you look at week 1, where they're kind of learning the poundages and execution of the movement, then you look at week 8, they've completely manipulated their form by week 8 versus week 1, which looked really good because they've tried to manipulate form for the sake of adding weight, right? So there's those micro adjustments can occur really slowly over time. So you have to be conscious of that, that setup. Same thing with like warm-ups versus, or those workups or warm-up sets versus work sets. You should execute a warm-up set the same way that you execute a work set. Yes, it feels different because it's lighter. Yes, it's easier because it's lighter, but you should brace the same. Everything should feel the same. And that way you're creating that kind of neural connection with that pattern so you can execute it, right? So, yeah, I've done that before. Everyone's guilty of it. I've definitely had movements where I'm like, 6 weeks later, I am not doing this the same as I was 6 weeks prior.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm no stranger. Like, there's plate mates that you can get off Amazon where it's like they're 1 1/4 pound increments. Like, I have no problem slapping those on or using like 2.5 pound jumps because like that's still overload. You know, it's like I don't want to lose my form for the sake of weight because your body doesn't care about the weight. It just responds to the tension, right? It responds to the work that you're doing. So like I've humbled myself quite a lot where it's like if I have to do micro jumps, but I'm doing it more frequently, but I'm keeping my shit tight, I'm cool with that.
For sure. Absolutely. I think I had another question, actually. Let me see here.
Baby Bird Bodybuilding. What a fucking name. I love that.
Is that
Baby Bird
someone's?
Bodybuilding, yeah.
Nice. If I were trying to grow a booty like yours, how many squats would that take approximately? Oof.
Not squats, you do your fucking glute marches. That's how you do it,
I
bro.
wonder, I wonder over the course of 15 years, I have contracted my glutes hundreds of thousands of times, probably. Oh, that's funny. I tell you, that is, I mean, probably true. I was actually, funny thing about like lower body development, I was actually kind of joking about the other day. It's like I have cursed with the really high calf inserts, where I don't have the calves that like go all the way down to my ankle. So they grow, but they grow out in like a small space, right? But now quads, on the other hand, I have good quad insertions that they roll right off the hip, so like though, that is useful. But I was joking because I'm a heel walker. I walk on that's my gait patterns. I've always walked kind of flat-footed and more on my heels,
Yeah.
which is really great for quad development over the years because I'm using my quads all the time and I'm using like my upper legs and glutes all the time. Really terrible for calf development, you know. But that's funny. So I don't know. It would take. I'm jealous of people. I'm definitely jealous of people that can grow their butt really quick. I mean, as are you. From the wellness competitor, if you can grow your butt really quick, you're very lucky.
Dominant. I know. Yeah, no, it's one of those things where it's like you were telling me genetically how people like can kind of dig off with their training but still have great response to growth. Like some are just genetically like they want to put muscle there. Like for me, my delts, I have really great connection, no prior injuries. Like the delts, I put on size and the delts really easily. My lower body from my exercise addiction of wanting to get 30,000 fucking steps every single day to, injuries and shit like that. My lower body has a hard time wanting to grow, but now I'm like certain and hopeful that it will grow, and it is growing just from like learning to take a fucking chill pill with life.
Yeah, I mean, and there's something to be said about like if you are competing category. I mean, I think that being honest with your clientele and yourself about what it will take to compete in a certain category and not just, like I remember when women's physique started, a lot of people were like, I want to compete women's physique because I want to do a rear double bicep. I'm like, okay, but you don't look like a women's physique competitor. You know what I mean? Um, so, and that's not to say that somebody that's not structurally perfect for the class can't compete in the class. You can compensate for structural deficits for, to a pretty good amount if you grow enough muscle, right? But understanding that process is going to take time to balance out for sure. I did have another question. Let's see here. Oh, this is not muscle growth related, but we can answer it anyhow. That's fine. When wanting to learn about functional health, where would you recommend one start? Oof. My YouTube?
Boston.
Or, you know what though? I think that's a tough question though, because there's a lot of information out there. I think the problem is that you're going to get different viewpoints and that it's kind of people get confused,
Yeah.
right? I think the confusion, you're not going to be able to go on Instagram and learn how to be a functional health coach. you can go on Instagram and YouTube and learn the basics for sure, right? You're not going to learn how to like fully work with clientele and possibly fix complex issues, but you could definitely become somewhat proficient in like the basics of it. But I think the problem is that it's just like training. It's just like nutrition. It's just like everything else, supplementation, is that there's a lot of different viewpoints. So my suggestion is this. My suggestion with any topic really is that learn some mechanisms first, because then when you learn some of the basic mechanisms first, it makes the protocols and the executions make sense to you. So for example, like if you go on my YouTube, I talk about a lot of the mechanisms and how certain things work and how certain issues work. So now if you were to go see someone post about something or a protocol, or see me post something, you're like, okay, that makes sense. Maybe something someone else posted doesn't really line up with the mechanism, and vice versa. So there's where like if you don't understand, if you only are trying to understand application but don't understand the mechanism, then you're not gonna get the information that you need, right?
Yeah, I agree. As someone who is newer to doing coaching the right way, functional health coach, bodybuilding, contest prep, all that stuff, what I found to be instrumental in my education was, first starting with mechanisms and understanding like it's kind of like people who can spot counterfeits, right? They don't study counterfeit bills. They study what the perfect $100 bill is. What happens when the bill looks as it should? What happens when the body functions as it should? So when you understand the body functioning as it should be, but then when things start to go awry, then you can pinpoint what mechanism is failing the system and kind of reverse engineer and go from there. But more often than not, you can memorize all the fucking protocols that you want. But until you understand client psychology and how that pertains to their behaviors, it doesn't really matter, in my opinion. So that's something that I've really hit home with myself, that get into the athlete's point of view. What is scaring them? What's holding them back? Help them to work through that fear, get them into therapy, counseling, whatever, and then design your programming to meet them where they're at, so that way you can work up to overall like advanced protocols. But more often than not, if you get like the nitty gritty, fine tuning things with their health, their mental health, those advanced protocols, you don't really need them as much as you might think that you need to rely off of them. Like, don't get me wrong, there are some people that do need that advanced level of care. But more often than not, like, the people are missing the basics because secretly I think they want to have something wrong with them to ignore their own behaviors and ignore their own pain. Because that was it with me. In my, like, extreme eating disorder bouts, my extreme exercise addiction, I was doing all these things to avoid pain, to avoid like sitting with my thoughts and stewing over shit that I had endured as, a kid, young adult, whatever. So what I have found is just focusing on the basics, having honest but difficult conversations with athletes, and going from there, not immediately starting them off on like a SIBO protocol if they haven't even, learned dick about nutrition.
Yeah, and you can apply that, since our topic today is muscle growth and topics surrounding muscle growth. I mean, it's the same thing with nutrition. I mean, supplementation is a great example. So when we talk about, PEDs and supplementation and enhancements and things, I think that you can find protocols, like you can find things that people are doing. But if you don't understand, okay, so do you need to understand why how a molecule binds to a receptor? And I would argue probably not. It's okay if you do, but I would argue probably not. But what you do need to understand is at least a basic understanding of how different compounds interact with one another and combinations of things. If you're going to be able to design, a protocol or design these recommendations. Same thing with training. Same thing with nutrition. Same thing with fat loss. Anything else. If you're not doing things that make sense, that's my mantra, right? It's like, do things that make sense, because our industry's full of information and our industry's full of a lot of like, I did this and it worked, okay, but does it work for everyone? What if it doesn't work for someone? Do we understand this? Do we actually understand this topic enough to adjust it for each individual, right? Um, Here's another question. Someone asked, how deep in a diet can one continue to grow, if at all? Well, kind of answered that.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
it depends on if you were slacking off in your off season and now you're like stepping on the gas because you have a show date in mind. And yeah, obviously natural versus enhanced, there's an argument for that. But at a certain point, like the whole point when you are dieting, especially for a contest prep, is to hold on to the muscle that you built, right? So that's why like training is important, but you shouldn't be just fucking ripping yourself out to hold on to muscle, right? Because it's a delicate balance between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. And if you're already in a catabolic state by being in a deficit, like you want to treat your recovery like very delicately. So I would worry less about, oh, can I grow into my show, and more about like fight like hell to keep what you already grew. And if you grow some, that's just a fucking cherry on top.
yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's, I think training is a great example of this. When I see people that they're like, oh, I'm prepping now, and they're getting stronger through the whole prep, which, yeah, if you have some momentum going into prep, like you can definitely continue that through the prep to a point. But if you're 2 or 3 weeks out from the show and you're still getting stronger, I'm going to tell you right now that you didn't maximize your off season. Like there's absolutely no way that you lost all that weight and lose all those leverages that you had during training, and all of that caloric, all of that caloric balance is so shifted that you're still getting exponentially stronger and feeling a certain way during sessions, unless you are one of those outliers that, of course, doesn't have to prep hard, which is it's very few people. But normally that just tells me that they probably missed out on some progress during that off season and probably weren't maximizing their actual, progression during that time. Because yeah, like you said, I mean, the goal of prep is, and the goal of fat loss is really two things: fatigue management and muscle retention, right? Those are the two things that produce the best look. How well can you manage fatigue? It's going to be difficult the leaner you get. And how well can you maintain muscle? Because that will give you a certain look that you're after as the time goes on. But yeah, I know. I'm like, yeah, I don't know and people are like, oh, well, it's because, you're enhanced. I'm like, listen, it doesn't work like that. If you're peeled and you maximize your off season, you're still going to probably get weaker.
Exactly. I can speak from experience, though, how we handled my cleanup phase. We had dieted for, 6 months maybe. I was still getting stronger. It wasn't like, obviously, like it is now that I'm in a surplus, but I was still getting stronger, still beating the logbook, making those, mini adjustments and mini progressions. But, realistically speaking, we were probably, 7-8 pounds away from like a decent contest prep shape. Any more had we pushed, it would not have been so.
Yeah, there would have been a point, obviously, where things would have started to taper off. And there also would have been a point where, from a recovery standpoint, from a nervous system standpoint, it would have been smart for us to back things off. Like that was another thing I had talked about recently. God, I do so many of these lives and podcasts. I don't remember. I think it was that one with Chris Tuttle recently. Yeah. That podcast I posted, and we basically talked about, the amount of workload and volume and intensity that you need to maintain tissue is a good bit lower than what you need to build tissue, because we were talking about that at the beginning of this. And like there becomes a point where smarter is harder, and smarter is what's going to elicit the best look. You aren't doing yourself any favors by being hardcore 8 days out from your show and be like, look, I'm trying to squat a PR. I'm like, who gives a shit? It doesn't, literally, it's not going to do jack shit for your muscle and your appearance at that point. You're going to create a whole bunch of inflammation, and stress out your CNS and make your peak harder, but it's going to do jack shit for the way that you look. You know, at that point, I mean, because realistically, in a week, 2 weeks, your muscle's not going anywhere unless you're bedridden for 2 weeks. It's not going anywhere. You know, I could go to Curves and do a circuit on their machine. I don't know if Curves still exists anymore, but I could do a curve circuit on all their machines, and my muscle would probably still all look the same, right? Yeah, it's kind of a silly. I get it. People want to be hardcore, but it doesn't really serve you, right? It's not really doing anything for your look. Your goal is to be shredded and peak to the best of your ability. You know, it's not to see who can, like, I know Ronnie Coleman did it in his video, you know, squatting 800 pounds, doing all that stuff, which is great. But again, it's not necessarily going to make you look better when you're on stage.
Right. But also, like, look at now his quality of life because of all the stuff that he did. It's like,
well, yeah, I mean, that's definitely a discussion that we could have. I know that people are pretty short-sighted when it comes to things like that. I think that people get really, and it's really easy to get excited when you're prepping, and especially there's like this dead spot towards the end where you're not close enough to be excited. You still just feel like shit, but then you kind of get over that hump, and you are getting excited. So you're basically just running on dopamine that last week running in the show, and you want to overdo everything. But I'm here to tell you that it will not help you.
running on dopamine and ice cubes.
Yeah, I feel it. Cool. That's all the questions that I had. Let me double check. Let's see. Let me make sure I didn't miss any in the chat.
Yeah, no problem. I'm gonna go take a freaking bath after this. I'm beat to hell.
Cool. I'm done. We're done. Awesome. I will repost. I'll tag you. I'll repost. I'll do the little fancy thing where I invite you as a collaborator, so it'll go to your page.
Yay! If you're able to download too, can you send me a copy?
Yeah. Actually, you can download it.
Yeah.
Also. Yeah. So if maybe people that are listening don't know this either, but it's the app IG Downloader. Literally just copy and paste the link in there. It downloads it. It's easy.
No shit. That's
It's
awesome.
just
I'm not.
IG Downloader. That's how I repost all those. That's how I repost all those to YouTube. IG Downloader, put it on YouTube. Done.
No, I literally would have people like download it and send me a copy via fucking email.
Yep.
Like
You just go up to the 3 dots, copy link, IG Downloader, done.
bless. Look at Austin Stout fixing our internals and.
I'm not. I don't know much about tech, but I do know that.
That's awesome. Well, sir, thank you so much as always. I appreciate your time, appreciate learning from you, and appreciate not potting, but I don't know, living with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for all the questions, everybody, and we will talk to you next time.
See you guys.
Peace.